A 6-year-old boy walked into the woods of America's most visited national park and vanished without a trace. Hundreds searched. Dogs tracked nothing. Helicopters saw nothing. Not a shoe, not a shred of clothing, not even a single footprint was ever found. Some say he slipped into a ravine. Others whisper the forest itself took him. Decades later, hikers still report hearing the faint sound of a child crying, only for it to fade when they follow. This is the true, haunting disappearance of Dennis Martin, a mystery that has never been solved. It was Father's Day weekend in June of 1969. The Martin family had a tradition, one they followed every summer without fail. William Martin, a man of quiet strength and fatherly pride, would gather his own father Clyde and his 2 sons, Doug and Dennis, and lead them into the Smoky Mountains for days of hiking, camping, and bonding in the wilderness. For them, the mountains were not a foreign landscape, but a sacred family place, where trails wound endlessly, streams roared everywhere, by silence and green. That year's trip was no different. They drove from Knoxville to Cades Cove, shouldered their packs, and began the climb up to Russell Field along the Appalachian Trail. It was the kind of summer day that leaves the air heavy with green, the smell of pine and wet soil mingling with blooming rhododendron. Doug, the older brother, walked confidently, his stride matching his father's. Dennis, just 6 years old, was smaller, quieter. He stayed close to his grandfather, his tiny legs working harder to keep up. He smiled often, shyly, but his eyes held a spark of wonder. By late afternoon, they reached Russell Field, a grassy bowl where the trees opened up to reveal distant ridges. They set up their camp, drove tent stakes into the earth, and gathered around for dinner. They laughed, they ate, they told the kinds of stories that pass between generations. Dennis was safe, loved, happy. Nothing about the scene suggested that within hours he would disappear from history. After dinner, the boys wanted to play. Another family they had met on the trail joined them, their children running and laughing in the tall grass. Dennis tried to join in, darting from tree to tree, his small body disappearing briefly behind trunks before he reappeared with a grin. His father watched carefully, reminding him not to go too far. But children are unpredictable, and Dennis was no different. Then the weather turned. The Smokies are infamous for sudden storms, and that evening, the sky opened. Rain came down in torrents, pounding the earth, soaking through fabric, flattening grass. Thunder rolled endlessly, each boom echoing off the ridges, until it felt as though giants were moving through the trees. Lightning cut through the canopy in jagged streaks, throwing the forest into stark, terrifying relief. The trails, already narrow, became streams of mud. Tents quivered under the onslaught. The smell of wet earth and ozone filled the air. Dennis was restless. He couldn't stay in the tent. He wanted to see what the rain was doing. Maybe he thought the creek would be swollen. Maybe he wanted to watch branches float downstream. His father and brother warned him not to stray far, but in that moment, as the storm raged and the forest trembled, Dennis slipped away. At first, it was nothing. A few seconds, maybe a minute. Surely he was crouching behind a bush, hiding as part of a child's game. They called his name. Laughter, they expected. Instead, silence. They searched the immediate area, lanterns flickering in the rain, their voices drowned by the storm. No Dennis. No small figures stepping back into the clearing with a grin. Minutes stretched into hours, panic calling at their throats. When dawn came, the storm broke, but the boy was still gone. That was when the nightmare truly began. Rangers were alerted immediately. This wasn't the kind of disappearance anyone could ignore. The Martin family was respected, their anguish impossible to dismiss. By the next morning, teams of rangers, volunteers, and local searchers had gathered. Bloodhounds were brought in, noses to the ground, tails high, but the scent trail went nowhere. The rain had been too heavy, the ground too saturated. It washed away tracks, erased footprints, smothered the faintest hint of where Dennis might have gone. The search grew. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping the humid air as spotters peered down into ravines and ridges. National Guardsmen joined in, combing through the undergrowth. At the height of the search, more than 1,400 people scoured the Smokies, the largest search operation in the park's history. They covered 56 square miles of unforgiving terrain. They dragged streams, probed caves, checked cliffs and rocky outcrops. Horses were ridden into the brush. Men shouted until their voices cracked. Flashlights cut swaths through the darkness. And still, nothing. Not a shoe, not a sock, not a scrap of cloth. No trail, no body, no blood. It was as if Dennis had been erased from the earth in an instant. Theories bloomed in the absence of answers. Some whispered he had wandered too far, fallen into a ravine, been swept away by a swollen creek. Others suggested wild animals, a bear perhaps, though not a single drop of blood or torn fabric was ever found. More disturbing theories took root among locals. Stories of strange figures seen in the woods, of feral people rumored to live deep in the Smokies, of something darker than animals stalking the forests. One family camping nearby claimed they heard a terrible scream in the distance that same night, a sound that didn't seem entirely human. The days turned to weeks, hope shrank. The Martins stayed, refusing to leave, their eyes hollow, their voices breaking as they continued to call into the trees. Volunteers left one by one, the search shrinking, the forest swallowing the noise and footsteps of those who had come to help. Eventually, the official search ended. Dennis was declared missing, presumed dead. But for his family, there was no closure. There was nothing to bury, nothing to mourn but absence itself. Years passed. This story became legend in the Smokies. Hikers told it in hushed tones around campfires. Rangers shook their heads when asked. Then, decades later, a new detail surfaced. A ginseng hunter claimed he stumbled across something near Big Hollow in Tremont. Scattered skeletal remains, a child's shoes, small bones. He kept quiet to avoid some severed body. A concept of the Smoky Mountains, Isa, and man. When he finally came forward, rangers searched the area, but nothing was ever confirmed. No bones, no shoes, no evidence remained. Just another Wisper in a story already soaked in mystery. To this day, hikers in the Smokies sometimes say they feel watched. They stop on the trail, turn, and find nothing but trees. They report hearing faint cries in the wind, like the voice of a child carried down the ridges. Searchers who were there remember the strange silence that fell over certain areas, a silence so complete it made the hair on their arms rise. Locals still talk about wild men, feral people who live hidden in the mountains, snatching those who wander too far from the path. Others say the forest itself holds secrets humans will never understand. Dennis Martin never came home. His disappearance remains one of the most baffling mysteries in American history. No remains, no clothing, no answers. Just echoes. And sometimes, when the sun dips low past the ridges, when the air grows heavy and the trails fall silent, people say the forest holds its breath. If you listen carefully, you might hear it too. The faint, distant cry of a child, weak and fading, carried on the wind. A cry that leads nowhere, because Dennis is still missing. Not a bone, not a body, no truth, no closure. Only the endless question of what really happened that night. Was it nature? A simple misstep? A storm that carried a small boy too far? Or was it something darker? Something that waits in the trees, silent and patient, watching from the shadows. The Smoky Mountains keep their secrets, and Dennis Martin is one of them.